Welcome to this Clinical Life podcast. My name is Stephen Beeson. I am a family medicine physician, founder of Practicing Excellence, and student of the game of how do we make the life in medicine super awesome, which it isn't right now. Is that right, Chris? So really excited about my guest today. Chris Malone, I had a chance to sort of get to know a little bit better a few months ago. I was at a conference and he was a speaker there and gave some extraordinary insights on what drives human connectivity, what drives trust, what drives true behavioral change. I consider myself to be a continuous learner in the journey of life, but you learn more from certain people and certain things than others. And Chris was way up there in terms of this guy's super smart with great science and integrity, and his ability to explain things in a way that's super actionable for us in terms of how we make the lives of patients and our care teams better. So, and the author of The Human Brand. And so, Chris, you better than me. So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, and we'll dive in.
Sure. Well, thanks. Thanks very much for having me. For those of you who are able to see me today, you can see in the background some clues. I am originally from the state of Maryland, which is the crab, fanatic state, and that's one of my favorite things. But I'm based in Philadelphia and have had the opportunity to work in a wide variety of industries, frankly, during the course of my career, from retail to hospitality to food service and in healthcare for the last 4 years, essentially. And along the way, as you mentioned, I had the opportunity to get to know really a world-renowned social psychologist from Princeton University, Dr. Susan Fisk. And she really not only changed my life, but kind of my view and understanding of the world. And together we wrote The Human Brand, how we relate to people, products, and companies. And we've been fortunate over the last 4 years to have the opportunity to now apply those insights that I foundationally learned from her to the practice of care delivery and patient experience and staff engagement.
So one of the things that was really interesting to me and sort of the fundamental mission of how do we use insights and data to enrich the lives of caregivers and patients alike was sort of the transcendency of sort of the simple rules of human interaction that are super powerful in the exam room, incredibly powerful for colleague to colleague interactions. Because I don't really care that much about what people think of Coca-Cola or Chick-fil-A. I mean, that's just not my thing. But the transcendency of how people feel about things is driven by compelling data in regards to what drives human connectivity. So share a little bit about your highlights of those transcendency of how we interact with other people and how it drives behavior and connectivity and loyalty. Share a little bit of the
Absolutely.
tagline.
So it was in probably March of 2009 when I first stumbled across this work by Dr. Fisk. And it was in an article in Harvard Business Review entitled, "Just Because I'm Nice, Don't Assume I'm Dumb." And it was one of her proteges, Dr. Amy Cuddy, who was writing about how there is this kind of subconscious human perception process that we are all using, and that we make stereotypical judgments in the workplace. Often that people who are friendly and affable and approachable, we assume that they may not be as competent. And on the flip side, people who are cold and less approachable and more difficult, we sometimes assume that they're more competent. And so she was, really talking about how we need to be aware of these stereotypical judgments that we may make, and that this human perception process, which I had never heard of before, has been shown to drive over 80% of human behavior in a social context. And I was like, wow, I never heard of that before. I'm a pretty well-read person. How come I've never heard of it? Well, it turns out that this was really only kind of validated and widely accepted as a universal human perception process starting about 2002, when Dr. Fisk, Dr. Cuddy, and Dr. Glick published their paper on this. And in fact, that paper from 2002 was recently recognized as one of the top 18 social psychology papers ever published to have the most influence and significance, basically. And so my reaction to this is, gosh, well, if it's true that there's this kind of perception process that's guiding so much of our behavior, how could it not be impacting other choices we make in life, right? Where we choose to work, what we buy, what we become loyal to, those kinds of things. And I had kind of always intuitively had the belief that, because I'd worked in consumer products and I actually even worked in professional sports for a while. I worked at the NBA and the National Hockey League Players Association. I kind of always intuitively had the belief that probably people were the first brands and faces were kind of the equivalent of the first logos. And kind of what we engage in now as branded traded commerce is probably just an adaptation of the way that we were wired by evolution to interact and form relationships with one another. And so I thought, well, wow, maybe this kind of model or insight could kind of test that hypothesis. And so on that basis, I reached out to Dr. Fisk and said, hey, could we explore this? And so for those who are interested, what is this we're referring to? Dr. Fisk has become, recognized as kind of the validator of what is now kind of casually referred to as the warmth and competence model, like warm as in warm, cold, and competent as in competent or incompetent. And what they've been able to show is that basically in the original game of Survivor, primitive humans, tens of thousands of years ago, had to learn to make two kinds of decisions every day, very quickly and very accurately with relatively little information, whenever they interacted with another person for survival purposes. First, we try to determine, using all of our senses, what are the intentions of this person towards me? Are they a friend or a foe? Can they help me or hurt me, give me something or take something from me? Or said another way, what degree of warmth can I pick up about their intentions toward me? And then, given what we think their intentions might be, what ability do they have to carry out those intentions? Are they strong or weak, fast or slow, foolish or intelligent? Or what degree of competence do we have? And it turns out that these two types of perceptions trigger a predictable pattern of emotions, and it's those emotions that actually drive our behavior. And so, this is something that we're all doing every day, guiding an awful lot of behavior, whether we realize it or not. And it has a huge impact on all of our interactions. We've had the opportunity to apply this in higher education, and it guides where we choose to enroll, what we choose to donate to, who we choose to vote for, where we choose to buy, where we choose to work, how long we stay. It just pervades an awful lot of what we do. And so that is really the insight model that we're talking about. And it turns out, not surprisingly, it has huge significance in all of our clinical care and medical interactions as well.
Right. So, it's really interesting, as I've sort of been, again, a student of what prompts patients to walk out and say, I had the best clinician ever. I'll drive further, and everybody I know, love, and care about has got to come here. There's certain elements that are consistent with everything that you say in regards to how patients experience care. And that is, was I heard? Did the doctor listen to me? That's a warmth signal, and probably a competence signal. Do they care about me? That's a warmth signal. And do I have confidence in them? And there's one study that shows that the confidence, the perceived confidence in a care team member is the highest correlate in regards to how they perceive that, and which is ironic because patients don't have any ability by which to assess actual competence. So it's proxies for the actual competence.
Yeah.
So it's take us a little further into the application of things, and we'll start with the loyalty of patients, right? I mean, patients staying within a network, with a group, with a clinic, with an organization is a tremendous proxy for financial viability, right? The churn of patients in out-of-network care and the loss of patients is unaffordable, particularly in this market. So if you were to say warmth and competence as an experience of decision-making patients, what are you seeing specifically in terms of how it's playing out in sort of the healthcare sector?
Yeah. A couple of things. First, one of the things that is often surprising for us, but it turns out is true almost in every context, is we are so much taught and trained in life that all of our success and our effectiveness comes from our competence, right? However, it turns out that warmth is actually the dominant driver of human behavior because it was more predictive of human survival in evolution. And so, for instance, to get to your question about the clinical experience, an awful lot of the focus in medicine is naturally and of course importantly on kind of the clinical competence of the care being provided. However, we often forget that the warmth is actually just as important, if not more important, in building loyalty, because kind of for someone who is perceived as competent but not very warm, the emotions that triggers is kind of envy and jealousy and distrust. And the behavior that comes along with that is kind of grudging cooperation. I'm not sure I can really trust this person, but I'll kind of go along to get along. That's not the kind of relationship you want to have between a patient and a clinician.
Right.
The other end of the spectrum, for someone who's perceived as really warm, friendly, and honest, but maybe not that competent, we kind of have indifference and neglect. They can't really help us, they can't really hurt us, and so we ignore them. That's not the relationship we want either. But it's having both that competence and the warmth that fosters emotional connection and loyalty and trust. And trust is an important one in the sense that we can have two types of trust, right? We can have trust in their competence, which is certainly important, but we also have to have trust in their intentions as well. The combination of both that really emotional loyalty comes from. And so in that regard, I think the opportunity for clinicians is to recognize that the clinical competence alone isn't enough to foster loyalty, that you've got to have the good intention demonstrated and for people to feel that part of it as well.
Right. Well, it's really interesting now that Amazon is moving to a center near you and delivering accessible, streamlined care. We sure as hell better be able to generate relationships that prompt people to say, I'm going to stay with my clinician. You know, I mean, our survival is at stake. So that's certainly some insights in regards to patient insights, driving perceptions, which create behaviors and choices and loyalties. What I'm really interested in, and again, my personal mission in life, in addition to being a father and a husband, is to help clinicians love their clinical walk.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, to look at their day-to-day clinical life and experience and look back in themselves and saying, I am being the clinician I always envisioned. I'm getting feedback loops that affirm that I'm making a difference. I'm proud of who I am. I'm practicing in accordance with what I believe in. I feel like I'm being the kind of clinician that I sacrificed everything to become. And that's our end game, right? I mean, to have clinicians that say, I love being a clinician. It's super hard, but I love being a clinician by the difference that I make and the feedback loops that I receive. So what would you say about the application of what we call a warmth and competence model, not only to patients and rendering their loyalty, but within and across care teams, and what that might do to the care team experience?
Absolutely. And, you know, to your point earlier about the universality of this, caregivers are human too, right? They have all the same human warmth and competence needs and thought processes as patients do. And, you know, I'm often reminded of the quote by Maya Angelou, that people forget what you said, they forget what you do, but they never forget how you made them feel. And the reason is that that's warmth and competence working on your emotions. You don't even have to personally experience the care. You can hear the story of someone doing something heroic or remarkable or inspiring, and that alone pulls on your heartstrings. And we need that fuel, as not only patients need it, that's where that loyalty comes from, but for clinicians and caregivers to have that experience with a patient and feel that emotional connection directly. That is the fuel and fulfillment and satisfaction that sustains them. And so they both need it. And so if we are creating situations or processes or burdens that prevent those connections from happening, both the patient and the caregiver and the clinician are losing things that they need to stay engaged.
Right. You know, it's really interesting. Some of the work that I do is obviously working with groups of clinicians. And there's one exercise that I have them do that is about, you know, tell me about the best moment you've ever had as a clinician. You know, the thing that's etched in your memory as the thing that you look back on years ago that was a moment that was deeply enriching and impactful for you. And having done this debrief with hundreds, if not thousands, of clinicians, it's never about a clinical sequelae.
Right.
It's about human connection. And I made a difference, even often in the context of a clinical failure, a death, a loss, a incredible tragedy, and the relationships that are made in that context. So, I think that there's real power. There's an interesting study that you may know a lot more about it than I do, that came out of Harvard, that was recently kind of released in the lay press. And it was the longest longitudinal study on human happiness, on what are the things that really drive human happiness. And they found through all this research done over the course of decades that they distilled down to it is the quality and the depth of relationships you have with other people that are the strongest correlation to the happiness in your life.
And it turns out that that is exactly the point. That is the definition of loyalty in our experience, right? Is that whether we realize it or not, we are wired as a species for relationships. And even in things that we intend to be or assume to be transactional. I never intended to be in a relationship with my dry cleaner, but unexpectedly ended up, she knows my family and has the pictures up on the wall.
I saw her yesterday.
All of that stuff. And I could not possibly consider going to a different dry cleaner. But, it is that relationship. And that is actually predictive of all kinds of our behavior. The meaning, and to your point about the study, not only is it something that we're wired for, but it is the thing from which we get that fulfillment. I think of the new book by Dr. Stephen Trutchak from Cooper University Health System called The Wonder Drug. The one that wrote Compassionomics, touting all of the same, pieces about compassion and empathy, where basically his notion is that the wonder drug is the key to happiness, and the key to happiness is serving others and forming those relationships, essentially.
Right. And we have such proximity to that in healthcare, right? And we were built as a healing profession and culture. How is it that we've screwed it up so epically that we've got 3x higher suicide risk? We've got a 61% burnout rate in this beautiful healing profession, and we have people running for the hills. It really makes you question, how are we deploying our efforts to take care of our people, to do purposeful, relational, meaningful work that is restorative to the experience of a care team member and a patient, number one, but number two, a basic fundamental human need that we're wired for. We're designed to be connected, to belong, to be a part of something bigger. And if we can't figure that out in healthcare, so some additional questions for you is, we want to be able to convey warmth and competence, and there's lots of actions that we can take that would render those sentiments among patients and colleagues, right? Can we learn warmth? I mean, is that a skill set that people have, that they're given by virtue of their genetic disposition? Or can we teach and develop warmth?
I think the answer is, to a significant extent, yes, with the following caveats. One is, in my experience and my belief, I believe that we were all born with our own natural talents and personality and tendencies and things that come easily to us and things that we have to work more at.
Right.
I, by nature, am an analytical introvert by nature. I got sales training early in my career, but I'm more introverted by nature. That said, by virtue of me becoming more aware of that, not everyone else is wired like me, and that warmth as competence is impacting all of our relationships and perceptions of one another, I have become more mindful of the importance of that and the importance of conveying that in addition to what comes easily to me. And so I think, one, all of us becoming more aware of how we are being perceived, and that this is how people form relationships. One is an ability, a step towards us becoming better at it. Then I think also, I feel like an awful lot of what I was taught and trained during the course of my career, I now feel like 50% of it is either no longer true or may not have ever been true. And then an awful lot of what I was taught about, how to be successful is actually at odds with what it takes for people to trust one another. And I honestly believe a lot of what we need in order to connect with one another, we were born with. And to some extent, it gets trained out of us. And we're taught, no, that just these competences or these tasks or these ambitions are what's important.
Right. No, it's really interesting that how our industry is responding to the financial challenges and workforce instability challenges we have right now. In fact, I was having a conversation with an executive a couple of weeks ago, and they said, "Oh my God, we're hemorrhaging money, and our board and our executive team is trying to figure out how to get out of this, and we're looking at mechanisms to optimize revenue and ways to diminish cost." And so I asked, "Well, how's that going to happen?" And talking about all the different service lines and all the trimming of the fat and consolidation of supply chain and all this. I said, what if you thought about creating a place that at every touch point, any patient that comes into it says, "Man, this place it's an extraordinary place. They care about me. They listen to me. They're kind. They help me out to the car. They're all different. They're beautifully diverse, but there's something about that place that, again, I'm staying here and people that I love are going to come here." And then, we stabilize our basic revenue source, which is market share, and reducing out of network loss, which is calculated to be immeasurable. And we create a work experience for those that are working here that say, I'm willing to access my discretionary effort to help this place succeed by what we stand for, how I'm treated, how my leaders interface with me, and how I become my best. And I'm able to be the kind of clinician I always thought I would be in this place. Yeah, we work hard as hell, but it's a fantastic place, and I'm going to stay here. And if we build these cultural attributes, which ultimately are about warmth and competence and, the ability to create human trust and connection, it seems to be a precursor to growing revenue and reducing costs, as opposed to skipping that step and going to all these mechanical downstream things with a team that is, again, running for the hills. I mean, I'm babbling, but what are your thoughts in terms of the sequence that we use these insights to apply them to the challenges that our industry is going through, and how do we do it better so we don't continue to create dysfunction and how we manage these challenges right now?
Yeah, I fear that healthcare organizations are on the verge of making similar mistakes to what many large businesses made during the 2008 financial crisis and recession, which was to slash costs, preserve the bottom line, and look out for shareholders, essentially. And what came out of that was actually, by focusing on the bottom line, you actually get less bottom line than if you focused on customers and employees. It used to be that the way to maximize shareholder value was by putting the best interest of customers and employees first. And as a result, the outcome of that was that shareholders benefited. There became, unfortunately, a myopic focus on shareholders, though, and it became, let's get the shareholder return at the expense of the customers and the employees. And it turns out that not only could you not sustain that very long anymore in this world, where word travels very fast, but you actually got less return. To where now many of the world's largest corporations are now embracing what is going to be called stakeholder capitalism, which is a recognition that we have to look out for the interest of all of our stakeholders, because that's the only way to sustain a bottom line. And we can't do it at the expense of one another. And so I fear that healthcare may be on the verge of kind of falling into a similar trap by focusing on the bottom line in the short term and doing it at the expense of patients and caregivers. And you'll actually end up with less, basically, as a result.
Well, it's interesting that you bring that up. I mean, if you ask 100 CEOs about what's the most important action you can take to survive what's in front of us for the next 12 to 24 months, and the majority will say taking care of our people.
Yeah.
But that's not the differentiator. It's, are they willing to take action and deploy resources to truly care for the people? So if I were to approach any person leaving your hospital or your clinic saying, what is it like here? And they say, man, we're listened to, we're heard, we're deburdened, there's a legitimate commitment to staffing, they're tapping us for ideas in this place, we're rolling. I'm staying here. I love it here. That's the engaged employee that will stay and access discretionary effort. But a lot of CEOs are saying that, but they default to, optimizing revenue, decreasing cost, and preserving the bottom line as their measure of success. And what is required to do all those things are people that are engaged, that root for you, that deploy effort for you, that become ambassadors for your future state. So
yeah, the key to
you
that
brought up one other, yeah.
the key to that financial outcome and that bottom line is the relationships. In our work over the last 4 years, we've been able to show that for every 1 point increase in either warmth or competence, you get a significant increase in loyalty. And that for every 1 point increase in loyalty, you get an extra 10 to 15% in visits and payments from patients over their lifetime with
Right.
that health system. Not what they think they would do or what they would like to do, what they've actually done in the medical record system over the last 10 to 15 years. And so you can make that connection. It's just that we're not thinking about it in terms of the cause of the financial outcome. It's almost like looking at the scoreboard when you need to be focused on the ball getting in the hoop on the basketball court.
Right. No, it's the act of surrogation, right? Making the metric the mission, right, as opposed to the metric as a consequence of the things that actually matter, which is the actions that we take and the spirit that we convey and the behaviors that we deploy. Yep. So, and we can ask Wells Fargo how that works out.
Exactly.
Right. They almost destroyed a multi-billion-dollar financial institutions by practicing surrogation. As opposed to taking care of their customers.
Exactly.
One of the other things that I want to dig a little deeper on is this idea of developing the skills. So colleagues, those you lead in the OR, in the cath lab, in the family medicine clinic, in the urgent care, or in the exam room with a patient are experiencing warmth and competence. And there's a variety of behaviors that will signal that. And you spoke a little bit about sort of self-awareness and insight as a predictor of those behaviors, and that I refer to as sort of coachability.
Yeah.
I dig a little deeper on that in regards to what do you see as the necessity to self-awareness as a precursor to behavioral change to signal warmth and competence to patients or colleagues?
Yeah, I think it starts with a desire to sincerely understand and connect with the other person, right? Mm-hmm. That if we're simply trying to get through a series of tasks or trying to accomplish something of our own, right, we are less likely to be patient enough to listen or to observe or to probe or explore. I think it requires a genuine, caring, right? It's like, mm-hmm, it's tough to fake that, right, genuine caring. You could kind of run through a set of tasks or a set of checklist or what have you, but it's hard to fake genuinely caring for someone. And I believe most clinicians, right, and caregivers genuinely do, and are often pressured by time or, productivity requirements or things like that rushes them through what would otherwise they would do more naturally. But I think the first step is to, care. And I think the second is to ask for feedback, right? Because this is a subconscious process that we are, all going through unconsciously. Patients don't even realize the gut feeling and judgments and things that they are perceiving at the time they are. And so the fact that we take the time to ask for some of this feedback, how are we doing? How are you feeling? How am I coming across is a great opportunity because it'll allow people to be, to surface and to share things that they wouldn't otherwise share if we didn't take the time to ask for that feedback.
And it's a great proxy for emotional intelligence, right? I mean, I am going to be receptive and hungry for feedback to allow me to improve. And in my physician coaching work, I always say, if a clinician doesn't have self-awareness and insight, the probability of them engaging in change is super low. Like, for example, if a clinician says, there's something I'm doing in that exam room that's prompting the patient to experience what they experience. I don't know what it is, but there's something, as opposed to a clinician who says, have you seen our parking lot? My LVN is incompetent and my access is terrible. Therefore, the self-awareness of actions that I take are creating the outcomes that we see is an important element in the process improvement of using insights to become better. One question I want to ask is that a lot of organizations are paying a lot of money to big vendors.
Yeah.
One of which starts with a P.
Yeah.
on getting insights in the voice of the patient, which again, I think asking patients how we are doing and using that data to celebrate and improve is important. How is kind of the warmth and competence framework different, supplemental, instead of, talk a little bit about that?
Sure, sure. So, the CAPS surveys and things that are required by CMS, I think, are a genuinely well-intended effort to, deliver better care and better experience to patients. The timing on which they were originally developed in the 1990s predated the development of some of those new insights that we have since gained about what matters to patients and how they form these judgments. So they ask an awful lot about kind of what did we say and what did we do, rather than how did we make them feel. And that's to Maya Angelou's quote, people don't really remember the say and do. What they're remembering is how they made them feel. And so they're trying to kind of fill the gaps there. And so I feel like that the CAPS, related patient feedback measures are only kind of seeing kind of the part of the iceberg that's above the water, when there's an awful lot more below that that's actually driving patients, behavior and loyalty and commitment. And so the difference is that warmth and competence address a much wider scope of the experience than does the CAPS surveys. CAPS tends to be very clinically focused and does touch on a number of kind of competence related things, but it doesn't very much address the warmth, trust, emotion side of things. Right. So that's kind of what's missing there. And as a result, if we're only focused on the competence side and we're not looking at the whole iceberg, if you will, there's only so much improvement we can gain from that.
Right. It is. I mean, it's so important to be able to have, voice of patient, but also to have those data points map to behaviors that will really render the loyalties and trust that we seek with our patients and with our colleagues. One of the things that I'm interested in getting your opinion on, and I admittedly have a bias here, which is what actions do we take based upon insights we receive to be able to make a difference? And there are places and people that have used sort of acronyms for do these actions. I won't say them, but people would recognize them. And again, they're not ill-intended, but it misses the mark in my mind regarding the subtlety of human connection.
That's right.
And I think it removes our ability to adapt based upon who we are and what the needs and the circumstances are of the patient, to say convey kindness and caring and curiosity about who they are and what they're going through, and figure it out.
Yeah.
As opposed to do this acronym. What are your thoughts on sort of acronyms in the spirit of standardization and consistency and standard work, which is not bad things, versus simple rules to guide people, to allow them to adjust based upon what's right for the moment regarding the patient in front of them or the colleague at their elbow? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, here's a couple of thoughts. One is, as you've alluded to, there is no universal checklist or list of tasks or tips or tricks that you use for every circumstance, because every patient is different, every circumstance is different, every clinician is different. Right. And so to reduce it to one size fits all really isn't practical. But to your point, I believe that the key, and for the organizations we work with, which are known to be world-class in delivering great engagement with their employees and great experiences with their customers, they boil it down to a handful of principles or values, that these are the handful of things that we want to be and that we want to stand for and that we want to exhibit not only to our patients, but also to our colleagues. And we empower you to use your good God-given human instinct and talent and emotional skills to perceive what the need is in that circumstance and to personalize it and make it your own. The silly examples are, if you've ever heard the Southwest Airlines, attendants give the safety instructions before the flight. They have the latitude to do that. Mm-hmm. At Starbucks, they don't have a set list of how to interact with customers. It's 5 ways of being, like being considerate, knowledgeable, helpful, and involved. And they kind of celebrate all the different ways they find to do that. And it's natural for us to want to reduce, particularly in healthcare, something down to a series of tasks. I think consistent quality clinical care follows
Mhm.
that path, but the non-clinical stuff, we're just not wired to perceive and connect that way
Right.
in the form of tasks and checklists.
No, it's interesting. I think that, um, behavioral variance puts clinical variance to shame in terms of its magnitude. So I think that at the same time, there is general principles that we can apply to allow us to render and signal warmth and competence, where the patient or the colleague walk out and say, I'm going to remember that clinical encounter forever, and I'm going to talk about it at the dinner table, and it's going to inform the choices I make going forward for me and my family. There are things that we can do to turn that dial, but at the same time, there's certain things that we need to be able to do. For example, explaining a new diagnosis to the patient. What's the natural history? What's going to be happening next? What do I do? And what actions can I take at home to care for myself? And what are my return precautions? And what do I need to look out for? And if we were to say just those three things that are super important in a new diagnosis, and say, how often in the inpatient, ED, or ambulatory environment do we deliver those three things? We're freaking all over the place. I mean, we don't even know what we don't know because it's so wildly variant.
Yeah.
And so it's this blend of general principles and ensuring we have a developmental process of helping our teams do the things that render patient loyalty by building this continuous improvement. And what I have found in my work is that developing people to connect with other people and to allow that breakthrough event of finding out who they are and what matters to them, or to get a clinical advancement or patient active participation in care, is the best as a clinician. And then as soon as they go through that toll booth, then they become advocates for doing that thing to their colleagues. You get this diffusion of learning new skills and applying new skills and becoming better for patients and more enriched in the clinical walk. So another question I want to ask, and we'll wrap with this, is your pay it forward advice. We've got a wide variety of clinicians and leaders and nurses and physicians and all sorts of people on this podcast. And if you were to say, gosh, warmth and competence is important within teams, from leaders to colleagues to patients, what would be your pay it forward advice to bring these insights to the environments where they are? What would you advise them in that journey?
I think my advice would be consistent with what many aspired to when they came to this profession, which is our aspiration and our goal and our measure of success should be making a lasting difference in the lives of our colleagues as caregivers and the patients that we provide care to. And the way to do that, I believe, is by practicing what we call the principle of worthy intentions, which is the idea that we put the best interest of others ahead of our own in the short term to demonstrate that our intentions are worthy of their trust and loyalty. And that as a result, in the medium to long term, because it is the nature of humans to reciprocate, we get far more back in return in terms of trust and loyalty and commitment than we would have gotten if we just tried to kind of get what we want in the short term. And not that I don't mean to suggest that others are, but if we have that orientation that we're going to kind of always look for the opportunity to demonstrate that I'm putting your best interests first, that will cause people to know that we're looking out for them. And that is the key to making a lasting difference in our experience.
It's live to give, right?
Right.
Which is in the Wonder Drug book. And it's not only how do we foster relationships to engage people and deploying effort to achieve something, but it feels really good to have an interaction with a patient, a colleague, a friend, a son, a daughter, a mom, a dad, a spouse, to do it in a way where they draw closer by virtue of warmth and a dedication to helping and supporting what matters to them.
Yeah.
And again, I love the transcendency. Yeah. So Chris, I'm so grateful for you and the work that you've done. And I like to hang out with people smarter than me. So I just ride their coattails. That's what I do.
Well, thank you so much. I've learned an awful lot from you as well. And there's an awful lot about healthcare and medicine and caregiving that I don't know, but I hope that we are bringing something useful, and universal that others can benefit from.
Yes, no, and my, again, life mission, in addition to, again, being a father and a husband, is for clinicians to love, and care team members to love their clinical walk, and to really do two things. Number one, be massively contributory to better care, and to do their work in a way that gives them joy, purpose, and contentment, because those are like two strands of DNA.
That's right.
Contentment is fueled by contribution, and contribution fuels contentment. And my offering, it has been the building of practicing excellence as a mechanism, means by which to build the skills of people to make massive contributions in a way that makes them immensely proud of who they are. And so, just as an offering post podcast, we're going to put a couple of links within the chat. Again, Chris's book, The Human Brand, is I think it's a fabulous read, because I'm about 30 pages into it, and disclosure, I haven't finished it yet, but it's an awesome beginning. And we're going to provide some other links in terms of learning about some of Chris's work and what he's done and how he's done it and the data supporting it. I've also spent the last couple of months writing a new book, or ebook, I should say, called Building a Coaching Culture. And again, around how do we build a continuously improving environment and culture that allows people to become their best, and to allow them to contribute and live contented, purposeful lives. Because what's happening in healthcare right now, totally unacceptable. And we have dominion over the things that matter most in terms of our ability to impact lives, to collaborate with one another, and to lead in a way that lifts the people that we lead. Everything else is, again, not acceptable. We can't be having this happen to our beautiful profession. So, Chris, with that, we will say goodbye, and grateful for you to be here. And I think that we should join arm in arm in gathering insights and responding to insights in a way that creates improvement. So we got to talk.
Thank you so much for having me. I look forward to joining arms with you.
Sounds great. Thank you, everybody. And look for we will be sending you some information in regards to the ebook download with a QR code, as well as some links to some of the work that Chris has done. And with that, this clinical life is out, and have an amazing day. Thanks, everybody.